it's done. I forgot last time. And we go up here. Right. Okay. So can you see the screen? Is it materialized yet?
I see it, yes.
Good.
Yeah.
I as usual, I only have one slide practically, 2 slides, because I think that's plenty for 30 minutes. And what you don't want to do is go flick, flick, flick. We want to have a discussion. So the agenda is coming up on the screen. I just want to talk about a little bit about why bother with some topic like this. And then I want to talk about how to get started, some of the ways in which you can shift from where you are to a sort of internal consultancy role. Martin's going to talk about the state of play. He's been reading up some links and some articles, so he can give you some insights on what's going on. We'll share those links as part of the links of the week, so there'll be some seamless homogeneity between what we're doing today and the links coming out. And then finally, it's really a discussion. It's about questions and comments. Simple as that. So that's it.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right. So let's move on. Okay. So just a few pre-ideas from me. I have seen this whole issue go horribly wrong because people underestimate the shift in mindset that's required. So that if you're in we say a cozy little environment, you've got your team, you're in the learning and development team, you know what your role is, you provide solutions to the organization. To be moved into a role as an internal consultant can come horribly wrong, and there's serious loss of face. So from being people who have credibility, you can end up with a team who has no credibility, that people feel aren't players, don't understand the organization, and don't perform in that role. So if you fail, or if you struggle as you move into the consultancy role, it actually undermines everything. So the idea that you can try it out there and move back in and everything's fine is completely wrong. So I think it requires a lot of serious thought and preparation in order to execute properly. And I believe it also requires stages. And I think anyone who says, by the 1st of December, we'll all be internal consultants, thanks very much, no problem, is being naive. And I think you need to take it stage by stage. So, and that can be over maybe as long as 6 months or even a year. You roll it out and you get people comfortable at each movement forward. And it's not just the L&D team getting comfortable, it's the rest of the organization getting comfortable as well. But they have to get used to this role. You have to get used to performing a different role. And I think it's both sides need to get used to each other. And for example, where you have an L&D team that is dispersed into the business, there's a bit of cuckoo's nest, the cuckoo in the nest. Who is this person? Why are they here? And an L&D person can feel, what am I doing? What's my role? So it's potentially very confusing and very dangerous. Whereas if you take it stage by stage by stage, for example, one organization that I was working with, I suggested they worked 1 day a week in the business and came back. And they did that for a couple of months, 1 day a week. And then when they came back, they spent their time saying, well, what are we learning? What are the issues? What are the difficulties? So the team kind of worked on it together so that as each day went ahead, they got better and better. We've got someone else coming in. Is that you, Michael, or is that someone else? It's a black screen. See, this is my clue that it might be Michael. Is it you, Michael? Michael. Anyway, right. If it is Michael, he's maybe not got his microphone on either. Let's assume that black screen is Michael. So it is.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So take it in stages. And I think little baby steps like that, 1 day a week in the business, is really excellent. The third point is that the key to all of this is to get decent feedback from both sides. In other words, you need people who will say, well, the way you behaved in that meeting, I wasn't sure you really knew what you were doing here, or that was very helpful, but then you went into, learning jargon. I didn't understand what the hell you were talking about. So you need people in the business. So if your staff are being distributed in each part of the business, someone needs to take on a kind of mentoring role to help that person in. And if no one is willing to do that, I think you've got problems. You've got some issues that you need to take into account. So I feel you take stages, you get as much feedback as you can. Maybe even one of your colleagues watches you perform as a consultant in a meeting where you're trying it out and can give you feedback from their perspective, from an L&D perspective, and you do it mutually. So I'll come to your meeting, you come to my meeting. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. And the final point is that never underestimate how big a shift this is, and never underestimate how undermined often colleagues in L&D feel. I'll shut up in a sec, Don. I think you want to say something. I'll shut up. But that you're taking people who are comfortable, have a degree of expertise, and all of a sudden you're putting them in an area where their expertise is changing, where they feel dislocated and uncertain, not sure how to behave. So you can end up losing your team at this point. People just say, hey, I'm out of here. And that's what you don't want to happen. On the other hand, there may be some people who take to it much better than others. And there could be individuals who are never going to make it as an internal consultant. And if that is the only option, you've really got to encourage them to leave. You've got to say, it's just not going to work. I think you need to look for a job back in an L&D team where you can really perform. So if it's too much of a struggle after 6 months, I think it's going to be a struggle permanently. But most people manage the transition if you do it in stages. And I also think that most people enjoy that different engagement. They enjoy a sense of the business that's much more visceral, much more real. They really get to feel the problems, and they can come up with solutions that are much, much more tangible, more realistic, etc., etc. So it can be a pathway to career development, innovation, and all sorts of things, if it's done right, but often it isn't done right. So I'll stop there. Any comments? Anyone got any points they want to make?
Yeah, if I can say something, Nigel Martin.
You're allowed, Don.
I agree with what you're saying. I think it's very important. I think in my organization where my team is dispersed, I think some of what you said is very important. The one point I want to make is that in addition to feedback, what I find is really critical is communications. And that means that this internal consultant needs to be getting the feedback, but the role is as much communicating as anything else. It almost like, in a sense, making sure everyone understands your added value. I remember at the CLO meeting at GlaxoSmithKline, we talked about this bit, and I think some organizations talked about combining almost the L&D and communications functions. And I think that increasingly is making sense to me. So I would just add that point about, both feedback, but communicating, marketing oneself.
Yes, it's absolutely true. So that everything you took for granted, you can no longer take for granted.
Yeah.
You can't just assume you have a value, you have to prove you have a value. All of that stuff is a culture shock and a mindset shift. And I think it can lead to a richer relationship, but you can also see how it can cause difficulty and trauma for some people. And usually the source of massive trauma is when it's done far too quickly without preparation, and somebody's just dropped in somewhere else and they're uncomfortable. Everybody's uncomfortable, and it's just a horrendous experience. So I think you can make it easy or you can make it horrendous. But can I just give you a few of my guidelines? This is what I say to people when they're getting used to preparing for that role. The first thing I say is that you've got to stop talking, you've got to start listening. And that is really difficult for people that spent their whole career talking. That they've been used to someone saying, "Oh, I've got a problem," and they go, "Oh, right, okay, we do this and this and this," blah, 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 blah. And from a new role, they have to say, "Well, what do you mean by that? Could you explain that a little bit more?" So can you give me some evidence? They've got to start being much more iterative in their relationship with the business. And that needs practice and it needs help. The other thing they've got to realize is that they're more a facilitator than an expert. They have expertise, but they bring their expertise to bear in a facilitation context. And therefore, when they walk in the room, they're not in the room as an expert. They're in the room to learn and listen. And if you've spent 10 years being the expert, it's hard to suddenly take that perhaps backward or sideward shift. So people need help with that. But I think it's a really interesting extension of the role. But it needs help and preparation. And the other thing is losing your center, losing the kind of nest where you felt safe and where you were with your colleagues into somewhere where you're out on a limb is very traumatic. And therefore, now, if the L&D team know what they're doing, they'll bring people back on a regular basis. So that can be, it can be with you, Don, it will be you grabbing your team online and saying, what's new, what's going on, where are the issues? And you as the leader will need to coach people through the difficulties and help them. So they need to have a kind of safe haven. Like, your group, Don, will say, "Oh, thank God, I can tell the truth now. Don's here." They can start to be honest with each other and feel that they're putting on a role when they're out there in the business. But those shifts are important, really helpful, but not so straightforward. And if you don't help people make those transitions, it's pretty painful. When it goes wrong, it's horrible because you get somebody rejected by the business and they've got nowhere to go back to. That's a horrible place to be. So any comments?
Yeah. Sorry, Don, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say I agree. So please go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, Martin, go ahead.
Well, do you want me to, it's interesting. Do you want me to just share a couple of things that you can look at anyway? But I think it's, my first thing is, it's potentially just one massive bear trap. If you do consultancy externally, then you'll know what that could look like internally, but you don't have what you have as an external consultant.
Yes.
Because you're in there every day. So you've got nowhere to hide. Yes. And I think that's a really, being an external consultant can be really tough. You have very tough conversations with people and, in a facilitated context. But sometimes you have some physical space as well. So, they get that from you when you walk out the room and you get it from them when you walk out the room. But when you're in the business all the time, I think it's worth thinking about the fact that actually that's quite a tough place to be because you're not actually going anywhere. So there's a good bit of Roffey Park research, and it's quite it's been around a while, but it's just packed with really a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, Nigel. But if I was to very briefly sum it all up, there'll be there's the bigger picture of the culture in which the organisation operates. If it's not ready for this type of consultancy, then it's going to be really difficult to do it. It's like you're saying, you can introduce your colleagues to the concept, but at the same time, you are potentially introducing the concept to the business. And if the business is not ready culturally to have someone operating in this way because it doesn't do it anywhere else, then you have to, be quite tuned into that. Yeah. So I think it's that Roffey Park research talks about fostering a kind of culture change around being able to have internal consultants who can then operate successfully. Yeah. And then there's some stuff around the skills. So you talked about the listening, but also there's this huge kind of skill set around influence. You've got to be able to influence people, and that's incredibly, it's hard to do, as anyone will know, and that kind of leads in, and also you've got to have some expertise and credibility. You talked about that, but you said you don't want to walk into the room as an expert, but actually you have to have credibility, and that probably means you will have some expertise. And how you feed that into discussions and facilitate change and move people from A to B is the real skill, but you will be trusted. So if you're flaky and you don't know what you're talking about, you'll be found out and it's not going to work. The bear traps are things like, I think, becoming a part of the culture you might be trying to change. And not actually functioning as a consultant because you get sucked in and you might not be challenging. For very real reasons, it might just be really tough to move people from A to B, and therefore it begins to fail, and then you actually become a part of the problem, potentially. And politics, and within all of that, you've got the kind of power of politics, because you're going to come up against, it could be a bit of an oil tanker situation, couldn't it? Politics mean status quo. People have vested interests in keeping things how they are for reasons, and then you're asking some difficult questions to change things, and that's hard. And the final thing was just the skills. If you're an internal consultant, then you've really got to keep developing your skills and be supported in doing that. And where do you do that? If you're cut adrift from a team, then actually your needs, I'm making it sound like it's a really tough job, and I think it's probably very rewarding, and it is also tough. But I think within that, you have to keep on top of your game. So your kind of CPD really matters. And what does that look like? So that's my sort of 3-minute, 5-minute summary of some of the stuff that I'll share in the email. But that's kind of...
that's what both of you said is very useful to me. I want to relate your last point about developing your own skills. I think that's really important. And I link it back to what Nigel said is bringing people back in. So I think that's probably, for me, following what you guys are saying, is those who are responsible at the center for the L&D, those who are out there as consultants, they need to bring them in from time to time, both, as Nigel said, to give them a chance to share what their experience is, what are the challenges they're facing, but also to help them continue to develop their skills and keep them fresh, and as you said, credible. So I think both of what, my comment is, looking at this, none of it is something I don't know, but this whole conversation puts a structure on something that I'm finding very valuable. And the last thing I will say is, I think for my own organization, I can help the L&D function in my role by using this idea of internal consultant for other technical functions in the organization rather than strictly the L&D.
Yeah, totally right.
And this whole idea of facilitation and not, expert and the whole idea of credibility, influence, all of what you say. I think what I will do with this, and I'm appreciating this very much. I actually am at a meeting next week in Paris with, again, some L&D people, but also some other people from our team who are what I would call internal consultants. And so I think what you're talking about is going to be useful and interesting and help them.
Good. Okay.
Right.
I've tried to write some things on the screen incredibly with a mouse, which is not the world's easiest way of writing. But one word that I've written there, which is very important, is framing. You can, you probably can't read it, but it's by the question.
I wouldn't have known it was framing, but now that you tell me, I can tell what it is.
Okay, well, the words are framing, culture, skills, influence, culture that sucks you in, and how to develop skills. They're the points that Martin was making. I'll tidy that up after we've finished. So I just wanted to write them quickly so that you know. But framing, one of I think one of the unique contributions that the L&D consultant can make is to be able to frame issues in a learning way. In other words, to see the learning angle for whatever issue comes up. And that ability to frame is not to come in, jump in with a solution, not to come in and say this is the only way to look at the world. But as you look at the world in a financial way or in an operational way, there's a learning way of looking at the world. And I think that's framing skill is almost the make or break. If the individual can't really look at that big learning picture without jumping into some specific solution, it's unlikely they're really going to make it as a consultant. So I think framing is very important, and even just to say the word to someone. And what I always say to them is stop shaping, start framing. If you shape, you go in and say, well, you know, this is the way that this can be done. Blah, blah, blah. You tell people what to do. Framing is to get them to ask questions and think about the issue with a learning spin attached to it. And that is a very big skill. And that idea of going native, of being sucked in by the culture, is also very, very dangerous. You know, you come out of your cozy L&D world, you're in some place, you want them to like you, you want them to respect you and give you an easy life. You therefore kind of go native, and therefore you're useless to the organization. So it's, you know, it's short-term gain, long-term pain going native. So again, that's the role when you bring people back. That's the kind of Don role in making sure people see the wood for the trees and don't just accept everything there is in that part of the business because it's the easiest way round. So I totally agree with all of that. Martin, do you want to?
Nigel, I think if you haven't already copyrighted that phrase, framing issues in a learning way, for me, that's a nice phrase to kind of provide an overview of what L&D is about.
Yeah, and it's absolutely what L&D in a consultancy role is all about.
Yeah, because it is this whole issue of facilitation. It just, thank you. No, thanks for that.
No,
can I just ask a question? And I don't know what it's like for you, Don, in your organisation, but this idea of a true internal consultant who's acting in an external way wouldn't have any resource or budget. They wouldn't have anything to bring. They're not providing a service. They're, the teams they're consulting would have the resource. And I think that's actually really, when we talk about the culture, there's also a structural thing here, which is if I'm a consultant, I'm an external consultant, I don't have the resource. Yeah. I'm brought in to facilitate a discussion about how to use the resource.
Yeah.
And that is fundamentally different to being a service provider who has the resource, because you are likely to be treated like a service provider, and also you're tainted by all the things you provide in some senses. If you have a tie-in with doing your management training in one way with one supplier, that's what you offer. So it's just a.
No, I think I don't think it's an unimportant point. I like it very much because, I would agree. My experience is, as I say, in my own organization, there are people who I would describe their role. They may consider themselves internal consultants, but they do have a budget. And I like your idea to say to them, act, even if you have a small budget, act as if you have no budget.
Yes, I think so.
I think it's a very good point.
Yeah, it's absolutely liberating. I wrote an article once which was "No Staff, No Budget, Problem or Opportunity," and it was based on a true story. That this is true. An American woman came back she'd been on holiday for just a week. And when she got back, her entire team had been dismissed. She'd lost her budget, but they said, "We want you to stay on." And so she got in touch with me and said, "Do you think that's a joke? I should just leave?" And I said, hey, give it 6 months, see what happens. And by the end of 6 months, she'd reestablished herself. She'd negotiated a whole bunch of stuff from the budget holders around the business. She began to assemble a different kind of team. And within a year, she had a really good operation going for her. So it was actually quite liberating having to persuade people to part with their money as opposed to spending your money, which is easy. Anyone can spend anyone else's money. But and it's like an entitlement. I'm entitled to 3% of your budget, so we'll spend it on whatever old rubbish we can. Where it's you have to give me $100,000 or 100,000 sterling to do this. That's a different conversation, and it's somehow a richer conversation because then it's all about impact and value. And that's a great thing to talk about, not just spending my budget.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. When I came to the Plan Academy in 2012, I had a healthy budget, but it was given to me by the field.
Yeah.
And so from the very beginning, I didn't see this as my money. It was the money that the program countries had given for the Plan Academy initiative. Yeah. And so I felt, really, I had to deliver to them. I didn't see myself having to deliver honestly to the CEO or to the board. I said, these are the people who've given me the money, And I think that made a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, really agree with you. Okay.
I feel sorry for those who didn't join this call because I've gotten it, as I say, I'm not sure there's anything that is earth-shatteringly new to me in this. But I think the whole focus on this and bringing it all together under this subject of internal consulting has been immensely beneficial for me and just interesting as well.
Excellent. No, it's good. I'm glad you came and I'm glad you contributed so fully, Don. Martin, any final words from you? And otherwise we'll stop.
No, I think that's a good place to leave it on what Don's just said. I think it's been...
Well, I feel a bit spoiled to have, the senior members of CLO and the Learning Performance Institute all to myself for half an hour.
You are incredibly privileged, Don. Absolutely privileged. Yep.
Okay, take care, you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thanks, Don.
Good to talk to you. Bye.
Okay, how do I? Do you know how? Oh, leave meeting.
Okay.
Hi, this is Chris, just joined.
Oh, Chris, hi, we just finished.
Oh, have we? I thought I had it at 9:30 actually.
No, it's 9.
I'm so oh, my fault.
We recorded it, Chris. I'll send you the slides. There was some, I made some sort of illiterate comments on the slides using my mouse as a which are only legible to me. So I'm going to tidy those up and I'll send you a copy of the notes. And the recording will be available as well.